Keeping boundaries as an empath is a difficult thing because by nature, to be an empath means that you are somebody that thinks about others and wants to do best by others at all times. An empath feels the pain and suffering of other people, and so often they want to be able to fix those people as an act of love. Now, something that is important as an empath is to recognize that you cannot fix everyone, that sometimes attempting to fix somebody is not actually an act of love. It is something that you're doing to self-soothe because of your own triggers that have been created and instilled whilst you were being turned into being an empath. Something that a lot of people don't want to talk about when we use the term empath is that often people who have high levels of empathy and feel people's emotions in the way that one would describe themselves as being an empath, they've been built out of trauma. Now, this isn't true for all empathic people, but most empaths that I know are such because they had a narcissistic or an abusive or a difficult parent that they had to read the room, read the temperature of their caregiver, to be so in tune and aware and awake of the caregiver's emotions. And so they have created themselves to be almost a human emotion barometer, able to sense the most minute details before those details are even become aware to most normal people. Now, this is a coping strategy, a very important method that the empath creates in childhood trauma to keep themselves safe. But the problem is that within the relationship of a parent and child, where there is a narcissism or an abusive structure and the child is managing their emotions and managing themselves to read the parent to keep themselves safe, is that there is a level of enmeshment that is unhealthy, but necessary and unable to be anything else because of the parent-child relationship. Now, unfortunately, as empaths grow older, they continue these damaging, enmeshed relationships into friendships and romantic cycles. And the level of enmeshment that is needed for a parent-child relationship, because the child requires the parent to survive, is actually no longer apparent in a friendship or a relationship in adult self. And this is why it's so important for empaths to put boundaries in place, because it is these boundaries that will keep the empath safe from further abuse in relationships. Now, whether it's a friendship or a romantic relationship, you'll often find that empaths draw in traumatized people because of the fact that the empath loves, is caring, and offers space for the traumatized person. Now, this can be a really beautiful relationship, much like what I do with my coaching, but that is with very, very strong boundaries in place and with the relationship already defined before it is actually comes to fruition. For a romantic relationship, there can be such level of entanglement that almost the empath forgets where they begin and where the other person ends. And this can lead to an enmeshment where the empath is in effect absorbed and destroyed by their own empathic nature, because we are often too kind. We're often kinder than the other person tends to deserve. Because the empath seeks to understand and empathize, they put themselves in the position of the other person far too often. And this leaves them vulnerable to people who are abusive. We often say, okay, yeah, they're going through a hard time and they didn't react very well, but I understand why they did it. And although we can understand why we did it, what we need to understand ourselves is often that this approach to empathy and kindness and understanding can often lead the empath experiencing abuse because of their empathetic nature. Now, if you're an empath that has experienced the things that I'm discussing, and I'm talking about this from a perspective of somebody who has gone through these things and is learning to implement boundaries, and it is a step, it's a lesson all the time, because boundaries are different for different types of people. You can't put in a hard boundary and just say, this is something that I don't do, because unfortunately all relationships harbour nuances, all relationships have different levels of connection, and sometimes there are other kind of hierarchical needs going on, perhaps from a parent to a child, or you're the parent and they're the child, or to a spouse, or to a manager, or a best friend, or whomever. And some circumstances can allow and afford for perhaps a little more kindness than others. So, for instance, if your friend had been grieving for a parent and they have behaved out of character, we wouldn't necessarily always put a hard boundary in there, because of the nuance of the situation. Actually probably would deserve a little more kindness and a little more empathy. So how do we put boundaries in as an empath? There is no hard, fast rule, unfortunately, as I just explained with the nuances of each situation. But the important thing to think about is what are you willing to go through? And if you are willing to be damaged as a result of helping somebody else, I would suggest that you need to work on your own self-esteem and to instill very strong boundaries. What do boundaries look like? They can look different for other people. For me, I don't answer work emails outside of certain times. My clients know that they can contact me, but I have a life as well, and so I have to put in things that I'm not just there, at beck and call. That friends who are going through things cannot just use me as a free psychologist and a free coach and a free therapist, because I'm actually a human being too. That acquaintances that have done this to me in the past, I'm putting boundaries involved with them now. If they want to come to me for free advice, they either have to have a relationship with me where it's a two-way street, or they need to pay for my services. Now, these seem very heartless and cruel, and often if you have been raised by narcissistic or abusive parents, you have been taught as an empath, as somebody who's grown up in childhood trauma, not to put yourself first. You're never taught to put yourself first. You are always serving the abuser or the narcissistic parent. And so because of this, even me describing things to you now, they feel selfish. And this phrase, you're selfish, you're being selfish, is often the kind of one of the armories of a narcissist to keep you in control and to keep you under their control. Remember that it isn't selfish to put boundaries in place. It isn't selfish to look after yourself. It isn't selfish to put yourself first in your life. It isn't selfish to say no to people who want to use and abuse you. It isn't selfish for you to guard your time. The list goes on, and you'll find that if you are somebody that has been raised to become an empath, then you will find that most of the boundaries that you attempt to put in place feel as if you are being selfish. Remember that is a mind fuck of narcissistic parents. Sometimes when you're trying to put a boundary in place, the easiest answer is no answer. If you are in a situation where somebody is abusing you or being abusive towards you, then sometimes no reply is a reply. Now, if you're able to put a reply that is kind and makes you feel as if you have said your piece or honoured your feelings, and you do that in a respectful manner, that is another response. I don't necessarily agree with ghosting people, but for some situations, the more you engage, the worse things get. And you'll get drawn into an argument or a load of bullshit, which really doesn't get anywhere. And so perhaps the best option for some of these things is to block, to remove, to rescind access, to remove yourself from their life. Because having you in their life should be looked at as being a privilege. And if those people don't treat it as a privilege and treat you with the respect and the kindness and love that all human beings deserve, then access is rescinded. Now, I know firsthand how hard it can be to implement boundaries, and it is sometimes a suck it and see approach, particularly if you have had relationships with people where you have had no boundaries. They get used to treating you how they have been allowed to treat you. And when you start to put boundaries in place, they can find the whole process very, very confusing. And at that moment, it's really important to say, I am no longer willing to do things that make me feel bad. And this is why I'm doing those things. And if they love you and they genuinely care about you, they will support those choices. Even if it means that they are not having access to your brain, your feelings, your thoughts, your emotions, your ideas, you as a physical person, whatever it is, whatever the boundary is that you're putting in place. If people love you, then they will support that. If they don't, and they don't like you putting boundaries in place, there is a big red flag there that that person is probably somebody that really needs strong boundaries in place to keep you safe. So the takeaway of this is that most empaths have probably been raised in childhood trauma. It's what creates an empath, and you have to be mindful when describing yourself as an empath that you probably have been through the software programming, as it were, to create you to be somebody who finds it difficult to be selfish and finds it difficult to put boundaries in. That boundaries are vital to keeping you safe, to keeping narcissists, abusers, and toxic people out of your life. And that just because you are kind, it doesn't mean that you are allowed to be abused. The most important thing, I think, is do not allow your kindness to be mistaken for weakness. And this is where those strong boundaries come into place. If you've got any comments or questions, or you have any thoughts on boundaries, please share them below. Let's all help each other. You may have some strategies that I can use and I can share and disseminate to my clients. And just we've all got things we can share. So please share your thoughts on this. I'd love to hear what you use to put boundaries in place with people that you find that are toxic. How do you go about putting boundaries in place? If you've got any other thoughts or questions or queries, feel free to send me an email, hello@lawofattraction.co.uk, or leave a comment down below. And I speak to you soon. Take care, guys. I love you. Goodbye.